Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Tech Talks with Santosh. And today I have a very special guest. I've been following this guy from a long time, and I have heard a lot of good things about NgXs. And finally, we have Mark here on the show, and he's going to talk about, of course, NgXs, right? So we will be sharing about the story, how NgXs came in, where you can use it, what is roadmap, and a lot of things. So thanks for joining us, Mark.
Cool. Thanks very much, Santosh. It's great to meet you finally, and welcome to the NgXs show. It's great to have you as a guest. No, I'm just playing around.
Thanks.
Yeah. So
Actually,
it's
thanks
great
for
to
having me.
great to finally meet you. I've seen you around, and at least in the Twitterverse, being your
Uh-huh.
awesome self. Um,
Ah, thank you.
Very kind and giving, and just yeah, being an awesome dev. So well done.
Thank, thank you. Thanks a lot. Okay, so before we move ahead, right? So let me just introduce Mark to you. So Mark is an software developer, and he's an international speaker as well as the Angular NGSX core team lead. And he was doing. I have no idea about this, Mark. So you said you will be doing some open source stuff for a few months. Is that still on, or you moved into your job again?
Yeah, so life actually took a bit of a strange turn. So I did
Mm-hmm.
have the grand plans to dedicate the month of December to open source, but then yeah, we had a couple of health issues in our family and a couple of interesting situations. So unfortunately, I actually needed the month off. So
Uh-huh.
I didn't actually get to concentrate as I wanted to on open source in December. Um, so that unfortunately was a grand plan that didn't happen. I do
Uh-huh.
plan to do that sometime soon though. Um,
Oh.
well, at some point in the future, I have just started a contract with some US companies,
Mhm.
which is yeah, which is really great. Doing Angular, working with NgXs, um, doing all the good fun stuff. So I'm enjoying that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So first question to you, Mark, is how you will define state management. So what's the definition for to you?
Okay. So I think state management is something that you're doing whether you think about it or not. And
Mm-hmm.
essentially, Santosh actually did give me these questions way ahead of time, but I, I
Uh-huh.
only saw I only saw them about 10 minutes ago. So
Ah,
so anyway, so state management is something that you do whether you think about it or not. And I think it's a good thing in your application to come up with a strategy for how you manage state. So what is
mm-hmm.
state, you might ask? I think maybe a better term or more common term is just data. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, our applications deal with data. There's data that comes from the backend. There's data that comes from user input. There's data that we calculate, data that we need to cache, data that we need to um, send back to the server, or those sort of things. And so essentially, they are the blood of our application, the
Mm-hmm.
lifeblood of the application. And as we build our applications and as our applications grow, if you haven't thought about managing your state or what approach you're going to take, it can lead to quite a mess. You could get off lucky if your application has really defined sections, and each section that you start, you can maybe do a little bit different and improve. And if your data doesn't really cross boundaries much, but as our
Mm-hmm.
applications grow, um, we really need to figure out how we're going to manage the state of our application. And there's also a number of challenges in terms of state. So, for example, if I'm doing a search that is going to
Mm-hmm.
call the backend, um, what happens? So, if I start typing and I type my name, so M-A, and then I pause a bit, at what time are you going to call the backend to get data? And maybe you've already sent off a call to the backend optimistically, and then I type in R. It's very likely that if I'm filtering a list, MAR could come back before MA, because MA is potentially a longer list than the list of MARs in the phone book. So you could actually have problems where the server comes back out of order compared to what you made the requests. How are you going to handle those sort of things? These are the sort of challenges with state, making sure that you are representing the freshest, the most current state to your users, and that it makes sense to them. So, for example, if they type in MA, pause a bit, and then R, and then suddenly it comes back with all the results for MA, or comes back with the results for MAR and then MA, it's just really weird and it's unexpected. So your choices in terms of state management and how you manage your state are going to affect those experiences of your user. So they're quite important.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I have seen some application not implementing state management and then they end up in a mess.
Well, they did implement state management, but it just wasn't a good approach.
Yeah, actually. So because if I talk about Angular application, everyone focuses on input and output, and then they don't think that they ever need any state management library. And at the end, they just mess up everything, and they think, okay, we might have actually should have actually implemented some state management. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, there's a question that people say, do you need state management? And I flip it around and I say, okay, you are going to do state management, but do you need something to help you? Are you going to follow existing patterns or not? If you think you've got a pattern that's better, or if you think the pattern of coincidence is a good one, then I think that's great. Obviously, some state management approaches are heavier, so they're more of an investment. So I wouldn't use them for a to-do app, even though that's a common example that people use. But yeah, I think it's something you've got to decide about. And maybe one thing else that I'll mention on that is, and I always share this story, when I started my career, I was a Windows developer using, I'll forget about my VB6 days, but then I got into .NET and Windows Forms, and it was this great paradigm. You drag and drop your interface, you double click a button, and then you write code behind there. And people just generally made a mess in those applications. That you would have direct calls to the database behind a button click and those sort of things. And the mess that was in that application is because there was no strategy for managing state, and there was no decoupling or abstraction or aim for reuse or any of that sort of stuff. So that made a mess. And I've seen that. I've been developing for over 20 years now. I've seen the exact same thing come up in Angular, where people are doing the same sort of thing. Yes, maybe you don't have a drag and drop designer, but your component ends up being this dumping ground for code. And really, I don't, in my opinion at least, or my experience, that's not an ideal. And we can aim for something better than that, I think.
Oh, that's actually a great example. So I have done Windows application as well when I started my career, and it was really mess. I mean, I can see you. So you have to repeat everything. Okay. So coming to the next question, how the idea of NgXs came in, and what is one thing which actually makes it different from other libraries? Actually, these are two questions. So what is the one thing which makes it different from other state management options which we have?
Okay, so where did NgXs start? I think so. NgXs started in the mind of Austin McDaniel. So he was the original the original developer of NgXs. But it really came out with a frustration of where things were with NgRX at that point. And he felt like the way that NgRX approached it, that there could have been a bit of a more angular way to do it. It felt quite unfamiliar to developers. And I mean, I guess I'm paraphrasing his thoughts here, but he actually made something called NgRX Actions in an attempt to try and improve things. And eventually he kind of threw his hands up and said, let me have a go and make an experiment and see what comes out. So he created NgXs. He made use of classes, of decorators, of all the things that Angular developers are familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And it absolutely took off.
Mm-hmm.
He was overwhelmed with the amount of response by the community. This thing just absolutely exploded. And
Mm-hmm.
it was really meeting a need within the community at that point. And it felt simple. It didn't feel intimidating. It didn't feel like you needed to go on a course or two to try and figure out how to do this. And I mean, many people were saying, "Oh, great, you made one without boilerplate," and you mentioned the B word, which yeah, people steer around for some strange reason. But I think the real goal, and this is the reason why I joined NgXs, is because I had felt the same frustration. I was on a big project. I got to grips with NgRx and effects and all those things, and I felt really amazing because I figured this stuff out, and then handed it over to the team of developers from that company, and I saw senior developers in shock and horror at what they now had to take on, and I felt devastated that I was giving something that was complicated,
Mm-hmm.
and and that, for me, that didn't sit well with me. I felt like I could have done a different job, and I could have done a better job, but I did the best that I could at that point. And it was really out of that position when I came across NgXs. I was researching, just having a look at state management for a side project, and that was the end of that side project. when I discovered NgXs, because it essentially became my side project.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Santosh, you just posted the link to the docs.
Yeah.
For that. And so anyway, so NgXs, for me, it's really simplified state management to a level that's palatable for most developers. I've had apprentice developers 2 weeks into the job, fresh out of university,
Mm-hmm.
and they're writing their own states and selectors and actions and doing all of that. So for me, the dev ergonomics, can I say, the ease of use and ease of understanding and getting into it, to me,
Mm-hmm.
that's some of the biggest selling points for me on NgXs. Um, does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. Actually, so and if I have to, I have some idea about NGRX, and uh, how it is related to Redux. So, is there any concept which is taken from Redux in NGXS as well?
Very, very much so.
Mm-hmm.
So I think underneath a couple of layers,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty much your global state management, or with a global store. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's essentially Redux under the hood. But what we've done is we've done some things to kind of disguise that a bit, so that
Mm-hmm.
um, you don't have to think about writing a reducer. You
Mm-hmm.
think about, how is my state going to respond to an action that's just happened?
Okay.
Um, and we've got many different. We've got the code in response to an action. I think is it's reasonably imperative. I.e., you're going to describe what your new state is, but
Mm-hmm.
you can actually you can patch your state. So you can just say,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I want to change this property to something else. We've got something called state operators,
Mm-hmm.
which are essentially immutability helpers, but built into NgXs as a first-class citizen, so that you can, if you've got a deep state tree, you can actually access properties deep inside and then insert an item onto some deeply nested array or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So um, so there are some similarities there, but then also some large differences. So, for example, there's no idea of effects being separate to your state mutations, um, which violates some principles
Mm-hmm.
when you're looking at a purist point of view. For example, the Redux dev tools they don't work perfectly with NgXs. If you haven't followed the purest Redux principles of, you would have an action that might call some sort of side effect. That side effect would result in another action, which would then change your state. If you can venture off of that paradigm, but the way that we support that, it creates a lot of simplicity. So, for example, in response to an action, our handlers of our actions are actually, they can be asynchronous. So they can go off, fire off a call to the back end, potentially even convert that to a promise, and then just set the state after that. So you can set state before and after that call. So that code is also quite familiar to developers that might have been doing that sort of thing in a component. But now with NgXs, it gives you a place for that sort of code to live, instead of all being behind the component. Would it be helpful to show a code example or something?
Yeah, sure.
Right now?
Yep.
Okay, let me figure out this share screen. Sounds good. There we go. Okay, so so this is actually an example that I've used from a talk that I've done. This is it's on my GitHub at Mark Whitfeld /NgXs-Diner, but I just used the awesome stack blitz and got the project in there for us.
I think so. Mark, can you just increase the font size a little bit?
I hope that this works in stack blitz. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, it works. So, yep, that's it. Perfect.
And I'll close that side panel there just so that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for example, if I have a look at my state, so this the NgXs Diner is just a very simple concept. It's like a restaurant. You have some recipes that they're going to make in the kitchen, but obviously those recipes are presented on a menu to you. Actually, I'll quickly open this up. This will probably make it easier to explain. So in my restaurant, I have some tables. Let's open this table, and we are going to order a couple of things. I'll have another curry beef stew. And let's just place another order there. Yeah, that's all good. Cool. So, currently I have two tables in my restaurant where people have placed some orders, and I can go to the kitchen, and I can have a look at what orders have now come through to the kitchen, and I can go to my stock room, and I can see what stock I need to pull off the shelves in order to fulfill all those recipes. So, we have 2 pounds of that shrimp. I don't know. That's probably from a couple of those meals or something. I'm not sure. But essentially, this is an aggregation of all that data to know what to pull from the stock room. Okay, so a very simple little application. And so I'll close that again. So now that you've got an idea of the paradigm, let's have a look at how we use our actions in state management. So, for example, I've got some actions like load tables, because I've got to go to the back end and get the list of tables, open table, close table, here, add table choice, remove table choice, those sort of things. And as you can see, this is a class. So it's a familiar construct. It's got these fields coming in the constructor. It does have this sort of familiar type that you might have seen with NgRx, and that's really just for ease of debuggability, so that it's a nice looking name. And then, so, for example, I go to my table state, and if you have a look in my table state, so each part of your state tree, you just declare a class. You don't have to worry about how they compose into the root. You just, in that sense, it's almost like Flux, where you're just thinking about one part. You don't have to think about the global. You can just think local in terms of the state. So I'll go to my tables, And right here, I've got in response to my action. So I'm using a decorator, @action decorator, that's saying in response to the table's action, please run this method. It gives me the actual action. In this case, I'm not actually using any information from it, and that gives me this context. So I can inject a service into my state. So there's my API for getting my tables, and I can just basically go load tables. I'll convert it to a promise and await it. I could use the observable and pipe and all that sort of stuff if I wanted to, but I don't need to. I do find that junior developers are more happy to deal with this sort of stuff because it's easier to comprehend. But I mean, I could have patched my state beforehand in here and just say maybe I have a loading property. So if you want to do that, let me just add that model. Okay, so I have a loading property which I could set to true, and then afterwards loading is false. So here I don't need to have a load tables success, load tables failure, that sort of typical three
actions
triad going on. We support asynchronous work as a first-class citizen. So, I mean, we could have multiple asynchronous things going on after each other or sequentially, or you could do a promise.all if you need them all to happen. So it's more familiar in terms of the paradigm for many developers. And you can manipulate your state before and afterwards. And I'll show you what's on the CTX object because that's interesting. So you can get the current state. So that's this local state. So the table states I can look at. So I go get state dot items or dot loading. So I can inspect the state if I need to make a decision from that. CTX dot patch state is just a convenience method to be able to just very simply update one of your properties at the root level. It doesn't do deep state patching, deep updates. But then we've got our set state method, and with this one we can use things called state operators. So for example, I can go set state and let me just do this. So I'll apply the patch operator. Yes, in there, that's good. So I've got the patch operator, and I can go items, and I can go insert item. So that is another operator.
Okay. So Mark, I think people are finding it difficult to read. So can you just increase the font size a little bit more?
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do that.
That's 125. I think this should be better. So can you just confirm, Rajat?
Are we good?
Cool. I think I think so.
Okay.
It's visible to me. So yeah.
Okay.
Hey.
Perfect.
Yeah. Hey, Lars.
Great. Thanks for asking. Yeah. So for example, we can go set state, and we can use these patch operators. So I basically say, okay, I want to patch the state, and I want to be patching items. I could patch multiple things. So I could say loading, and I want to patch that to false or whatever. I don't know, whatever I wanted to do. And then I could insert some sort of item. I don't know. Obviously, that's not matching my signature for a table. So probably have there we go. A table has a name. So I've got the world table now that I've inserted. You can actually nest these things down. So I mean, I could even go. I could go update item, and I provide some sort of matcher for my item. I don't know, a table includes something, and then I could then excuse my typos, patch. And then I could then basically say, I want to update the item that matches that and patch it in this way. So there's some really cool stuff that we've got there to be able to help with these sort of deeply nested states and those sort of things, which you've usually got to flatten out when you get to Redux.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to. So I mean, you have to either use spread operator to spread everything, and then access property and update it. That's what we generally do in Redux or in NgX.
Yeah. So this is doing all that work for you. I'll show you something quickly. I mean, in essence, if I want to create my own state operator, I can go items, and then I can do what you'd usually do.
Oh, okay.
Items, comma, and then here's my new item. There's Bob. For some reason it's not. Oh yeah, I've got to give the type or whatever. Yeah. I'm just going to do the great TypeScript thing and do any. Nobody saw that. So that's actually all that a state operator is. It's basically something that returns a function that will do that immutability operation. What's really cool is, for example, if anyone's familiar with Emma, produce, I can type it at some point. Oh wow. So if anyone's familiar with Emma, the Emma produce method is the correct syntax for a state operator. So then I could just my draft.items.push. If you're familiar with Bib, if you're familiar with what Emma does, it allows you to think that you're not being immutable, but you are. And you can do mutations safely. So it gives a couple of helpers in that regard. It is Redux under the scenes, but it's really focused on developer ergonomics. Cool. Does it? Hopefully that. I don't want to digress. You got me started talking, so I could carry on.
Go ahead again. We are loving it. So okay, so this is just a question. So in Redux, we generally you already mentioned it, but I'm not able to figure this out. So in Redux, we define, okay, this is, let's say, table state, this is order state. So here you don't have to worry about it. You just need to create a class, right? You are on mute, Mark.
Did you mute me? Because I didn't mute me.
No, I mean, actually, I'm not.
Okay, so am I still sharing?
Yeah,
okay,
you are.
Great. Okay, so must be the interweb glitch. Okay, so I've just gone to my restaurant module, and here I've got NgXs module.for feature, and I basically say, okay, well, here's the states.
Oh, okay. And you can add multiple.
Yeah, you can. I've got order state, I've got table state, and then I'm just trying to think. I've got my recipe state, and there I've got for feature recipe state. So you can add to that state management as you need. Lazy loaded modules, it's all good. And I mean, there is the one thing. So for example, in the table state, you'll see on top of this class. So it's your normal injectable service. That all looks familiar. You just add another decorator on top. It says at state, tell you the type of the model, and then we've got to give it a unique name, and that is actually where it goes on the root state, on the global state. So, and we can provide some defaults, etc., etc. So that's our actions. That is how we do the manipulation of our state. And then obviously we do have selectors. It is your typical paradigm with Redux. You've got actions, you've got your state that you're changing, you've got your selectors. Obviously this one kind of skips over. Effects are kind of built in here because asynchronous work is a first-class citizen. Oh, sorry, the one thing that I missed out here on the context, you've also got dispatch.
Oh, Okay.
So I could dispatch another action if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see, it's quite an imperative interface, but it's deliberately so that it can be more familiar to more developers. By the way, this sorry, before I move on to selectors, this load tables here, this action called load tables, when I dispatch it, so as you can see, okay, up here I've actually dispatched it. So on initialization of the state, I just dispatch it straight away. If you're interested in the state, I just start the load. No questions asked. So if we have a look at this dispatch method here, let's just wait for the IntelliSense. Can you see that? It returns an observable.
Okay. Observable.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
So this is the other thing that's quite unique with NgXs. I don't use this. I don't use this particular feature that often because I prefer to architect my applications a bit differently. But when you call dispatch, that action will be dispatched. It gives you back an observable, which you can then monitor. You can subscribe to and
Okay. I think we lost your voice again, Mark. Okay, you are on mute. Yeah.
now I'm unmuted.
Yeah, you are unmuted.
That is crazy. Okay.
Maybe
okay, so
Stagblitz is saying something.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I think it's my internet's just coming and going. Okay, so for example, I'm doing an alert as we all do, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so on completion of the load tables action, I'm going to alert hooray. But that's very weird. What do you mean completion of an action? So this action will actually complete once all of this asynchronous work is done.
Oh, okay.
So we have the idea of an action has a life cycle. If there was an error somewhere during this, obviously you've got your error. So you could actually have an action erroring. Because I have awaited this, what does that mean for my load tables method? My load tables method is going to return a promise. So because I'm returning a promise, NgXs that invokes this method goes, oh wow, look at that, you gave me back a promise. So only once that promise is completed will I mark this action is completed. If I didn't use async await, I'll just hack this quickly. So take async await away. I'll do my promise. So I'll do pipe, and then I might do a tap. That would be data in there. Whoa, it's not scrolling down. Okay, just doing a bit of a transform here. So now, well, okay. Oh, because it's promise of wait. Okay, I've got to import that. Yeah. Okay. So here I haven't done async await. I've done an observable. So I pipe, I tap, and I patch my state in my tap, and I return this back to NgXs. You notice that there's no subscribe. So because I've now returned some other sort of asynchronous object to NgXs, I've returned an observable. This action will only be deemed to have been completed once that observable completes. Okay. And then also NgXs obviously subscribes for you, and it manages that subscription. And then if we may be thinking of the case that I mentioned earlier on, cancel uncompleted true. So there's your equivalent of a switch map. I just pass through the option, cancel uncompleted. So what that would do in this case is if someone else calls load tables, it's a bit silly here because load tables has no search parameter or anything that changes. But if someone else calls load tables and this load tables here hasn't finished coming back from the server, NgXs will cancel this subscription and then run this new one to get the new subscription. And then subscribe to that, execute the work, all of that.
Kind of switch map and without using switch map.
Yes, yeah. So it's a more kind of obvious. I find that those switch map, concat map, merge map, exhaust map, all those things terrify people to begin with.
Yeah.
They are really awesome, and I'm a massive fan.
Okay, I think you went on mute again.
Yes, I'm back. I have
back.
I have an amazing internet connection, except for this one. Okay. So what I was saying is people often balk at those switch map and those things, and those are fantastic operators, and they're really good for those very difficult 5% use cases. But if we have to throw it in for the rest of the 95%, that can make an application quite difficult to understand and unapproachable for many developers, which can actually increase the cost of employment of new developers, and it can actually have a business cost impact just because we made some sort of technical choice. So the aim here is to make this as approachable as possible for as many developers as possible. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of that. So that's quite a unique differentiator. For example, if I okay, I'll do a switch map here. Actually, yeah, merge map is merge map. And let's say I went ctx.dispatch, and I had some new fancy action there that I dispatched. What that is going to do, remember, dispatch returns an observable. So now the completion of load tables is going to be dependent on the completion of whatever that thing is. So cool. So that's quite a unique differentiator with NgXs. Selectors are quite straightforward. You can create a selector with a little @selector decorator. So for example, this basically takes the state, sorts those items from the state. But also, so this basically takes the local state model into the selector. This is another thing where we are a bit different. Typical state management, your selectors take in the global state. And so if you want to test that selector, you've got to kind of construct this global state to test it and call it. Or you're trying to dig inside your create selector to get the actual method inside to try and test it. Here, the method, its parameters are essentially its dependencies. If I go to something that's more advanced, you can. So this is a queries class. Some people call them selected classes. Some people call them queries classes. This is not a state class. It's just a kind of a container class, and I can combine two other selectors. And here I write a simple pure function that takes in those 2 bits of data and does something with them. So extremely testable. This one is a lazy selector. It returns a function, but I won't go down that path because selectors is a whole amazing world when it comes to state management in general. It's probably your most powerful tool in your toolbox.
I mean,
cool. I've been talking a lot.
No, it's okay. I mean, that's why you're here, right?
You got my passion. Come on.
Let's take some questions from the chat.
Yeah, awesome.
I think that was few. Okay, so there is a question from Rohit. So he says, "Hi, this might be a redundant question, but I just joined and I'm wondering How is this library better or different than Akita?
Yeah, so interesting question. So I think Akita. So personally, I haven't used Akita,
Mhm.
and so I can't speak with experience there. So for your context, maybe Akita is perfect. And when people say, is NgXs better than NGRX or Akita or whatever new flavor of the month there is, I say assess your context, look at your team, look at your organization,
Mhm.
look at your code base and complexity, and make a decision from there. What suits you? Because I think that's why
Mhm.
that we should be making decisions on what's best for our team and what's best for our company. Then maybe, yeah. So,
Ah,
but when it comes to Akita, so I think Akita is more. Um, I think, yeah, and this is, yeah, I really wish I had more experience to draw from here. But essentially, Akita, you're actually dealing with your state more as an instance object that you're going to interact with. Um, um, I don't know if they have actions. Here, you're asking me a question, and I can't honestly answer very clearly. Um, I think Akita is quite well modeled around the place where you have a store that has one particular type of object, and you're always going to have a load the list of objects, add an object, update an object, those sort of things. It's got quite a nice, almost repository sort of pattern around it. One of our community members, um, so we have a massive amount of awesome plugins for NgXs to do with forms, to do with storage, to do with dev tools, Logger, all of those sort
mhm.
of things. But we also have an organization called NgXs Labs, and
Mhm.
one of our team members actually he he made a plugin called NgXs Data that
Mhm.
is venturing quite far off the normal NgXs paradigm. It feels very different. I haven't used it because it's not. I'm not a fan of that paradigm.
Mhm.
But he's made NgXs Data, which feels a little bit more like Akita,
Oh,
interestingly enough. So um, yeah,
okay. So there is another question. What is the difference between NGRX and NGXs? So I'm sure you might be getting these questions a lot.
I've never got this question. Yeah. So what is the difference? Watch this podcast from the beginning up until now. I've gone through quite a few of the differences,
Yeah.
but to me, I think it's we very much focused on developer ergonomics, make it easier for
Mhm.
the developer, more familiar for Angular developers, um, and and I mean, in terms of boilerplate, often people's comparison, oh, NGXS is so much less boilerplate. NGRX has done a fantastic job there in reducing boilerplate, and they've got all these helpers and all these action
Mhm.
creators, juicer creators, and all those
Mhm.
that have really done a fantastic job in terms of listening to the community. And I must say, the guys on the NGRX team, they're probably the first guys on Twitter to plug any NGXS post. It's the craziest
Mhm.
thing. People think,
Oh.
oh, we're competitors, or they're the enemy. No, not really. They've got an amazing solution. We've got an amazing solution, and they suit different developers. So people often ask me to do the comparison for them, but maybe a way to cheat on this question is to say you can do the assessment yourself. Um, for me, I find the mental model a lot easier here. I'm not forced into RxJS land with observables. I can still be reactive without being forced into one particular library's kind of paradigms with all the piping and all that stuff. That's all functional stuff, and functional is amazing. The kind of stuff that we've had to write in NgXs is
Mhm.
mind blowing, but I don't think every single one of our developers need to be a guru with that sort of thing. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
that's good. That's great, and great to hear about the love shared between both the teams, right? NGXS team and NGRX team. Uh,
yeah, they're awesome.
Okay, so Rohit says one difference I can see is that this is more of Flux and NGRX is more of Redux. Is that true? Because I've never used Flux.
Yeah. So okay. So interesting question. So this feels like Flux, but it has all the benefits of Redux.
Okay.
Because the challenge with Flux, and maybe Santosh, just for a bit of background, Flux is what came out of Facebook when they first had this challenge of how to solve state management in a large
Mhm.
application, and they basically created this idea of a unidirectional data flow. It
Oh,
came out of, I think it was essentially like counting
mhm.
on Facebook posts, and how to manage the state around this ever changing metric that's so
Oh,
important to people's lives. Um, Not
oh,
mine. But essentially, Flux was a very localized view of state. And you would have
mhm.
many different Flux stores throughout your application. And the challenge arose, how do I bring the data together from two different Flux stores? So how do I resolve this issue of almost data envy? Um,
Mhm.
because because how does this store know when this one's data has changed, or so that we can combine this data and bring some sort of view to the user. Um, and that was quite a challenge. And so
Mhm.
Redux, having a global view with immutability, basically introduced the idea of, I have a global route that I can watch for changes, and it'll
Oh,
let me know if anything changes. So I really like about NgXs is that it feels like Flux. I can just think locally, but I get all the advantages of global state. Um,
mhm.
as you saw, those feature states and those sort of things, I'm not worried where
Right.
that's going to go on the tree. I just use it, and it's awesome. So
That's
hopefully
cool.
that answers your question.
Perfect.
So, but there's no mutation, by the way, in NGXS. If you set the development mode flag, it will shoot you down if you try and mutate one of those state objects. It is all immutable.
Ah,
It is Redux under the scenes. We've just
oh,
made it
okay.
easier to consume.
Okay. I think the next question which we had, I think we already discussed while going through the code that how to handle global state versus local state. So there is no concept, right? I can just go ahead and use whatever I like. So I can just take the data from, is it? Or
I can maybe add
yeah,
something there, if you want to
yeah,
bring the question up so that
yeah, 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 sure,
the
sure.
guy's name can appear.
I mean,
appear.
one second.
um,
So that was
so
question. Yeah. But
cool. So when it comes to global and local state, I think people
mhm,
are referring to local state now, a component
yeah,
state that's local to a component, and it's very much
yeah.
a hot topic. Um, we had some experiments along this front that we tried to do about 2 years ago, but unfortunately, it was quite closely coupled to Ivy, and
Oh,
Ivy took a very short time to come out. So basically, those experiments disappeared into the ether as
uh,
Ivy was working out how to come out. But essentially, there are some amazing approaches to dealing with local component state that's very specific to a component. There's RX state
mhm,
from RX Angular, which is really
mhm,
great. There is NgRX component store, which is a
mhm.
really great approach. Um, there is something coming along the pipelines that I will be
Uh-huh.
releasing soon that
Oh,
is very NGXS like. Um, it's not heavy on the RX bit, but it's fully reactive, it's local state, and it's going to be awesome, but I'm not going to reveal anything yet. So,
okay. That's cool.
but there are
So,
some awesome libraries out there at the moment.
uh-huh.
They don't quite scratch
That's
my itch, but yeah.
cool. So, next question is what is in roadmap? So probably you can answer it now.
Yeah, so in terms of the roadmap, we have a couple of changes that we're wanting to do in V4
Mm-hmm,
um, that are quite fundamental, that are basically behind flags at the moment, in terms of
mm-hmm.
specifically to do with how selectors are handled.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, so I mean, we are on version 3 of NGXS,
Okay.
and version 3.0 was released in 2018,
Oh,
and we are
was it?
now we are now on 3.7. And I've had people saying, oh, why don't you do another major release? The fact is that when you do a major release, you've actually broken someone's application. So it's actually not as positive as you might think. Yeah, so we've prided ourselves in maintaining backwards compatibility, adding new features in a very safe way, putting things behind flags or options. We need to make some fundamental shifts. So at the moment, the focus is really actually on creating schematics that will help with changes towards V4. The V4 changes are not groundbreaking and drastic, but it would be nice to have some schematics around that. So that has been one of the major things that's held up that the release of V4 is we had some guys helping us with the schematics, and unfortunately one of the main guys fell sick for actually a couple of months. So yeah, we're not supported by any organization. We're all a bunch of enthusiasts with our own personal time and our wives' permissions. Those of us who have wives. So maybe if there are any schematics gurus out there that you live and breathe schematics and you would like to help us out with that would be great. So there's Sanchosh, there's something to plug.
That's good.
But yeah, so on the roadmap, some changes towards V4. As you have seen, there's quite heavy use of decorators, and decorators are awesome. Although they can do type checks but not type inference, and that's something that's a little bit of that's not great. So they can check that your typing is correct, but they can't infer the typing for you. It's a long-standing open issue with TypeScript and decorators. And the other thing is that decorators are experimental. Now we've opted to use it for the familiar Angular experience. I know that at Google they've banned all non-Angular decorators because Angular decorators get compiled away. But the fact is that all decorators it's just code. It's a function that basically runs on your class or runs on the class property and gets the class and the property. And basically we can build up some metadata around it given that information. And there are some other mechanisms that we can use. So we're not bound to decorators, but at the moment the decorators give the best developer ergonomics. And that's one of our goals. So that's great. But we are looking for some mechanisms that try to maintain those ergonomics that still, but don't necessarily use decorators. So there's a bit of a roadmap for you.
So Lars had a few questions. So I'm sure he is joking, but he says, when will NgXs be merged into Angular? So it feels like Angular.
You're awesome. Lars, you're awesome.
Okay, so another question from him. So he says, how do you ensure cross-version compatibility with Angular? You mentioned that, right?
Yeah. So this cross-version compatibility with Angular actually hasn't been the biggest challenge. Obviously, with Ivy, there's a whole back and forth around that, and really it was just making sure that NgXs was part of Angular's test suite for making sure Ivy worked. They did introduce a bug in Angular 11.1 that had an issue with NgXs, but they fixed it very quickly within a day or two. So cross compatibility with Angular. What we try to do is we try to support as many versions backwards as humanly possible. So I think we support all the way back to Angular 6 or 7. I can't remember at the moment. But we have integration projects for every single new version of Angular that's released. So we're trying to support as large a community as possible. We're not trying to force people to upgrade because often there's organizational constraints that can be a challenge there. But it's actually not Angular that's the big challenge in terms of version compatibility. It's actually TypeScript, because we want to use some new awesome TypeScript feature or enhance the typing that can break all those older versions, because they're bound to old versions of TypeScript and they don't understand the TypeScript definitions. So it's a challenge. But thanks for the compliment and the question, Lars.
Okay, I think the next question is, of course, do you want to promote anything on the channel?
Yes, I mean, I can promote myself. So
Sure, go for it.
I do do software development consulting. My main focus at the moment is Angular, and obviously, if you're using NgXs, I can help you out. But I mean, I don't want to talk about myself too much. I think if I want to promote something, I'd say when you make decisions within your project, think about the other developers. As a senior developer, I should not be writing code that only I can understand. I should be thinking about my team. And if you think about it, your code is read many times by a compiler. It's read many times by the computer, but there's no potential for loss of data or loss of information in those processes. The place where bugs come into software is where the other interpreter, another developer on the team, or maybe it's you 2 weeks later, comes and reads this amazing code that was written, and they don't quite get the full mental model of the code. And that's basically where bugs come into software, and things start to break down, and that costs businesses money. It wastes our time as developers. We'd all rather be writing something new than fixing some bug that came up. So I think when we write code, think about the other consumer, which is the other developers out there that are going to be reading your code, and make sure that it's your code supports the whole team, and not just maybe the more senior people in the team. Cool.
So in case you want to follow Mark, here is Twitter handle behind. So you can follow him on Twitter, Mark Whitfeld, if I'm pronouncing your name. Thank you. So by the way, Lars says you should talk, because he's also maintaining actually some code backward compatibility, but in a single code base. So in case you want to talk to him, you can find him on Twitter. I think I know Lars, so I don't have to go ahead and tell you, okay, Mark, Lars, Mark. So I don't have to do that. So you can connect with him on Twitter, and probably you can figure this out.
Cool.
Cool. So that's it, Mark. Thanks a lot for joining us, and it was a great session. We had fun, and we also shared the knowledge. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Santosh. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Sorry if I spoke too much, but I'm passionate about this stuff. So really, thank you so much for having me. It's been really good. Thank you.
Thank you for joining. And on closing notes, we have another episode this week. So on Friday, one of the amazing guy I know, I've been following him from last 2 years, to 2019. So Sam Julian from Auth. So he will be joining us on Friday, and we'll talk about, of course, Auth0 and identity management. So you can join us on, I think it's on 10 p.m. IST, same time. And in case you have any questions, feel free to send it on Twitter or just send me a DM. That will be great. And we can take those questions. So that's it for the day. And see you again on Friday. And thanks again, Mark, for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.